All right, so we're gonna get started. I am Chantel Mosley of What's Troubling You. Okay, can we mute our phones right now, our computers, please? Thank you. All right, I'm Chantel Mosley with What's Troubling You with Chantel and Charlene. And let me just tell you what What's Troubling You is about. It's an open discussion um, that will allow you or us to say what's troubling us, such as ourselves, personal relationships, finances, or social issues. So it's more of an open discussion about what's going on. And I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. So I guess starting to my left, which is Miss Amanda.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Chantel and Charlene, for the invitation to be a part of this very important dialogue on the topic of grief. We know each other by way of our servant leadership at the Potter's House, and I'm very grateful to be able to share my experience, and then grateful for each of you for providing a platform so that we can all advance the understanding of grief, so that we can all heal and help others to heal.
Very good. Ms. Pat?
My name is Pat Dunlop. I met Ms. Chantel at Texas Wesleyan when we were working on our master's. I am the mother of a son who was murdered January 6, 2011. He was an only child. And my husband and I have been living through the unimaginable for the last 9.5 years. And so I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
All right. Fern, did you want to say anything?
Hey, wow, y'all kind of caught me off guard there. I was planning on listening, but
You can listen, that's fine.
okay, but bothering me is my of course, dealing with my mom passing away a couple of years ago. I don't really think I've actually processed that. And I have a son that's in a very difficult situation right now that bothers me a lot. So those are two things that that are bothering me the most right now. And I'm just trying to figure out a way how to stay positive and work through it. I'm gonna put myself back on mute.
Okay. And I also forgot to say that What's Troubling You is also on YouTube. We do have a YouTube page, so like and subscribe there. And we're also on Facebook. You can like us on Facebook. And I'm here, and I came up with the topic of grief because in 2018, my aunt passed, my mom's twin. And I didn't realize that I hadn't dealt with that until my son had an accident. He survived, thank the Lord, but everything just came flooding to me at that time. So I thought it was a good topic to come up on, talk about, to help others that are dealing with grief and learn how to deal with grief in a proper way. Charlene?
Well, welcome to our another one of our great discussions. We are really setting forth now, as Chantel said about What's Troubling You. We came together because we met at the Potter's House of Fort Worth, and we got to talking, and we have so many like interests. And one of the things is just being able to help people. That's our really first interest. That we're like about is wanting to help people. But another interest that came about was being able just to have a platform or to offer others a platform to be able to share their knowledge and their experience about different discussions that we have that's relatable to the public. I am currently, I'm an LPC, I'm an LCDC, I'm also a MAC. I work for the criminal justice system. I'm a therapist and a life coach. I'm certified in a couple of things, but I love people and I always want to help. And so by us having this platform, we're giving voice to people. And that's what, I love about this, is just being able to give a voice to people. And as Fern has said, walking through this, sometimes, we can pay for therapists. I'm a therapist, so I do support therapy. Yes, I do. But sometimes we just need to have also an open dialogue with just people that you're familiar with. And to be able to have that, you're able to see others who've also experienced, or those who have learned how to deal with or cope through different things. So I'm just happy to be here. Chantel had a fabulous idea, and to be able to draw our sisters together and be able to talk about this today. So welcome, 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 welcome.
Yes, welcome. As you all know, I'm Chantel. I have an Associate's of Arts degree, a bachelor's in social work, a master's in marriage and family therapy. I'm a life coach. I'm also certified in premarital counseling, and I worked at the state of Texas as a caseworker. So, who wants to get started talking about grief first? Amanda or Pat?
All right. The thing that I was thinking about this morning is that after 9.5 years, and my husband and I did go through therapy with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Trauma Support Services of North Texas, who work with parents or people who've had sudden traumatic losses. So we did do that for several years. And I think the thing that I was thinking about is that after 9.5 years, you think you get to a place where you should be okay. And it only takes one thing to take you right back to where you were 9.5 years ago. A friend of mine lost her son in a car accident almost 2 years ago. And she and I were watching Hamilton. And there's a song in that. And the song that has just resonated, or the words, is they're talking about living through the unimaginable. And at first, we used words like learning to accommodate the loss of Kevin in our lives, learning to dance around the pain. I mean, we used so many different things. And the reality is that we continue to learn to live through the unimaginable. Kevin was a graduate of Tuskegee University, and he was scheduled to start law school that fall. And I think about, all the different sayings that you hear, like my father died in 2000, and then Kevin died 2011, and people have said that when you lose a parent, you lose your past, and when you lose a child, you lose your future. And so every now and then that hits me because, life does go on for other people. I'm real aware of that. I am a social worker, and I have a master's in professional counseling. I haven't quite finished everything, so I don't know if I will, but I needed to do that at the time. I'm also retired from Fort Worth ISD, where I was an intervention specialist for 30 years. And so I'm used to helping people be put back together. And I think the big thing is that for some things, you just never quite get put back together. I think about living through the unimaginable, and just how hard it's really been, and the people that I've met along the way. Used to, before my son died, I knew very few people who had a child that had died. And I think that I had such a thought in my mind of what a homicide victim was, and it wasn't Kevin. It wasn't him. And so it made me really have to look at things differently. It took me forever to be able to say my son was murdered. I would say he died or he passed away, but the reality is he was murdered. Was he doing anything wrong? No. The police say he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. My son would say there should be no place I can go that I shouldn't feel safe. And so I think the big thing that we struggle with now is that his friends and friends of our children, friends of our friends, have children who are getting married and having children and moving on with what we thought our life would look like. And so I think that, at first I was hesitant to do this because it's like, I just don't want to have to talk about, this horrible loss again. And yet it's like if we don't talk about it, you just kind of keep it all in, and that's not good either. But just watching Hamilton and knowing that whereas I'm at almost year 10, my friend is almost at year 2, but sometimes the pain is just equal. You know, it's not like I've passed and I'm okay now. You know, there are days I still don't want to get out of bed. And there are days I still don't want to have to tell one more person, congratulations, or I'm so happy for you. And oh my gosh, of course I'll come to your child's wedding. Oh, baby shower, I'm there. And it's like, you know what? I'm not feeling that all the time. You know, it's not like I used to feel so angry. And I used to say I'm not jealous of people. And I still want people to have great things happen to them. So the reality is, most of the time I feel cheated. You know, I feel cheated. I feel like my husband and I did so many things right, and we both worked so long and so hard with other people's children. And then when our only child is taken from us, how do you make sense of that? You know, just how do you make sense, and how do you continue to live through the unimaginable?
So, Ms. Pat, if you had to define grief for you, what would be the definition?
For me, grief is, it starts with love. You know, if I hadn't loved my son so much, the grief wouldn't be so painful and at times unbearable. And so I think grief has to have its root, at least, in a great love. I think the more you love someone, obviously, the more you hurt when that person is no longer there. I think for the first year or so, I would think all the time, will the joy of having him ever outweigh the pain of losing him? And so I think that grief for me is just this incredible love that will continue to always be there. But, you know, and that's the thing, it's the but at the end that keeps me, I think, not stuck, because I don't think I'm stuck. I think I'm where I'm supposed to be, if that's such a thing. You know, we talk about the correct way to grieve. There's no correct way to grieve. You know, you do what you need to do to get from point A to point B. And so I think grief for me is just rooted in love and a great pain when you lose that person you love the most in the world.
Thank you, Ms. Pat. Amanda, what would grief mean to you? What's the definition of grief for you?
So I agree with Miss Pat that grief is absolutely rooted in love. It is the cost and the price we pay for the measure that we give for those that we're connected to here on this earth. And you know, I resonated so much with everything that she said. Grief is something that I think that most people who have not experienced either a traumatic loss or a significant loss. And what I mean by that is by way of relationship. You know, each of us have different levels of relationship. So we can lose the same person and grieve differently. And it's all based on our relationship. But I think a lot of people think that, you know, a few years and then, you know, will pass and then they should be better off in their grief. And, you know, Miss Pat certainly spoke to how grief lingers, and how when she was talking about Hamilton in the song, that is what we call triggers, right, in the grief community. So some of you are aware that in 2018, my oldest son, Derek, who was 24 years old, passed away. It was certainly the worst nightmare realized. So my heart goes out to Pat, because I've lost loved ones in my journey. I've lost my grandmother, who was really, in essence, you know, a mother to me. And that shifted my world. She passed away in 2001. It caused me to challenge my faith. It caused me to challenge who I, you know, am as a woman, who I was then as a mother and a wife. But losing my son rocked me to the core. And I'm a firm believer. You know, I walk in the rudiment of my faith. Even in that moment, like Miss Pat said, you know, I had to get to that place where I could still have a praise on my lips for the God who gives and for the God who takes away. So I certainly if I had, something to say to other people who are experiencing loss, and I heard, Fern mention her mother, I would say there has to be time where you allow yourself to do the good work of grief. And it looks different for every person. Moving forward, I used to hate when people would say, and it still to me is kind of, I think, insensitive when people tell others who are navigating loss and grief, you're going to have to move forward. You're going to have to get over it. They would want you to be happy. These are what we call gratitude platitudes. We need to be mindful of the things that we say to people who are navigating loss and grief. One of the things that we've adopted in our family is we have agreed that we will carry Derek forward. And that means we give space and freedom for people to say his name. We give space and freedom for people in this house and whoever is connected to us. If you're not having a great day, it's okay that you're not okay. If you have been triggered by a memory, you're willing to share it even if you're sobbing. And, I think that for each of us, especially with a platform like this, it's important that we allow others who maybe have not necessarily experienced grief at this level, that we allow them to equip themselves with tools that can help them to navigate loss with someone that they love, right? Like the gratitude platitudes. One of the things that was bothersome to me in ministry was I would hear people say, elder, because, I'm an elder, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Or they would say, God will never put too much on you than you can bear. So because I love the word of God and because I love God, I would give grace. But one of the things I want to remind us, especially those of us who are in ministerial positions, is scriptures are better when they're lived out. So at a time when someone's hurting and they're vulnerable, us throwing topical scriptures at someone is an inference that they have little faith. And that's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to add an additional hindrance to their journey of healing by throwing out what we have been accustomed to hearing in a church setting. What would be appropriate as a response if someone's lost someone or who's even dealing with grief and navigating it is to simply say, I have no words, but my heart is with you. That resonates. So I'll leave it there and we can continue the discussion because I can stay in that vein, but this is not about me. It's about what can we do to help others and then help one another in our healing.
I was going to say, I think one thing that becomes real important is allowing people to know that they can be angry at God. I can remember when Kevin first started, I stopped to visit an older couple that were friends from the church. And the wife said that she had been so worried about me because it was obvious I was so angry. And who was I so angry with? And I was getting ready to say God. She said, don't say you're angry with God. Don't say you're angry with God. And I thought, well, actually, I said, well, you're right, because if I don't say it, he won't know how angry I am when we know God is all-knowing. And so I think that's the biggest thing is getting over that. If we really view God as our Heavenly Father, he is big enough to accept that I am angry and I don't understand this. So I think that's a really important thing is that you can be angry with God. And, and that's where most of my anger was directed toward God. People would ask if I hated the boys or was angry with the boys that were responsible for my son's death. And my answer was generally no, because I never prayed to them and asked them to protect and keep Kevin safe. I prayed to God for that. And in my mind, scripture, once again, the boys that were responsible were the thieves that come in the night to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what they did. And so I think that his death took us on a real spiritual journey, me especially, because my father was a minister. I was raised in the church. And I think I had a real elementary idea of who God was. He was the God, if you didn't study for a test and you passed, oh, thank you, God. Anytime something good happened, it was thank you, God, thank you, God. And so when something bad happens, I was ill-equipped to deal with, this God that I always viewed as so loving and so amazing taking the most important thing in my world away from me. And so I had to start over. I had a friend that God sent me during that time, very unlikely, but he does send us his angels when we need them. And she told me one day, she said, well, Pat, you do know that God is not your fairy godfather. And so, but just the insight that came on that journey and the understanding of grace, grace and mercy both, I think, became a real big thing. And I did call people on the platitudes, God is good all the time. Okay, what does that mean to you? I would want them to explain every statement they made that was just so, routine. God won't give you more than you can bear. Exactly what does that mean to you? Because in my mind, God does give you more than you can bear because he's there to help you bear it. And so just really calling people on it and giving them a chance to rethink it before they throw it to anyone else. God's something special and God has something planned for you. Okay, don't do that because you really don't know. So, or people who walk in, and I don't know, Chantel, but walk in and I say, how are you? And they say things like, blessed and highly favored. What does that mean? I'm no longer blessed or highly favored because my son was murdered. And so really just calling people on the things that they say without thinking, because you want people to be able to think about it. And I love your response to, I don't know how you feel, but you're in my prayers and it breaks my heart that this happened to you. So anyway, but that's just my thought.
Well, I certainly appreciate your sentiments, and one of the things that I say to Ms. Pat, and I love that you shared it, is that you say, I address when I hear someone say something, I speak to that, and I'm a proponent of that as well, because I believe that we can have a healthy dialogue, because the more we can have that conversation, the more we can educate others. Because if they haven't lost a child, and maybe they've lost their mother, or maybe they've lost someone significantly close to them, that's a great opportunity to say, well, how did that feel whenever, your mother transitioned? What were the worst of your days like? And then what did you find that helped you? So I tend to turn the tables. That's what I do, because I want them to become more aware of how pain and loss affected them, because the more that they can understand their own, then they can be empathetic towards one another, to others. So, but I do like what you said about, let's go ahead and just talk about that. That would be kind of what the LPCs here on the panel would do. So how does that make you feel? Let's unpack that.
Yeah. Just thinking, I thank you, ladies, for being transparent, because again, what you've experienced is horrific, and no one can just understand that, what you've experienced. I've experienced loss, and I've had grief, and a dear friend of mine passed away due to illness. I remember when my grandmother passed, that was devastating. When my father passed, it wasn't as devastating, because I kind of knew and I was kind of prepared. But when a close friend of mine passed away, and that was my first time ever watching someone leave. That was probably the most devastating for me, to watch a person leaving the earth, and the hospital allowing myself and the family to watch this person expire. And it stayed with me for a long time, to the point I had a difficult time separating myself from this person. I could still see the person, I could still hear them, I could still smell their cologne, conversations would just kind of, and I remember crying hysterically on the way to work, and just couldn't understand, here I was, the God I served, and here this person served, and there was so many junkies in the street, and people hurting people and doing stuff, and wronged the people, and why? And I didn't understand. And this was only in 2003, before I came to Texas. And that was a big experience for me. And a month later, a month before, my grandmother died, and then the next month, a friend of mine passed away. So it was a horrific experience at that point in my life. It was a pivotal experience. It allowed me to experience God in a different way. But to give a definition for it, grief is a loss of someone. And I went back and I looked to just kind of get more of a clinical, Elder Avalon brought up the LPC. So yes, I said, let me get something a little bit more clinical, just not just about loss. And a member of the American Counseling Association, the ACA, explains grief is a reaction to loss of anyone or anything an individual is attached to deeply. So, and Chantel and I were talking, and, we talk about complicated grief, stuff that's really more intense, and then grief on a level. We are going through a pandemic at this point in our lives, and people are losing their jobs. People are losing relationships with others. They're losing family members through passing away. There's a lot of things happening right now, and people are going through a grief process in so many different levels, and so when she brought this up for us to have a dialogue, one of the things that, we talked about was it's such an expansive word. It's not just, it's from, something that happens to you in terms of losing a loved one, but also it goes down to the loss of a job. And now there are people who are grieving. There are people who are grieving about not only losing jobs, but also losing finances. And I know this doesn't sound as horrific, but I had chosen not to look at my retirement plan on purpose, because I kept hearing the numbers of how, the Dow Jones was going down, how it was being affected. And I said, well, no need to look at that, because that's a bit depressing. I don't want to know. And so it came the other day, and I completely forgot. Just opened it, like just routine, opened it, and I saw what I lost in this quarter, and it was a lot of money. And so I didn't feel grief, but I remember something my husband said. He said to me, he said, you know what, don't pay attention to that, because that's not true. If we just stay steady, you've heard them talk, stay steady. We're just going to ignore that for now. It's going to come back up. Don't worry about it. It's going to come back up. And I thought for a brief second at that moment, people who are retiring this year, it won't come back up. People who've worked 30 years, 40 years, it's not coming back up, because they don't have time, or if they stay in the business, another grief process, just being able to deal with certain things. And this is horrific. Some of these things are very horrific for people, and putting them in a place. So being able to not only define it in a loss of a person, but also anything that deeply affects us. I think that's a definition for grief. Thank you.
My definition for grief will be a mental anguish, because I think it's the mind. The mind constantly reminds you of what you've lost, the memories. Like I said, my aunt passed in 2018. It was a shock to me. Everybody else knew that she was dying. I guess they accepted it. I hadn't accepted it. And then later that year, my mom got sick. She's better now. And then my other aunt got sick. And then that January of 2019, my son was in an accident. So I hadn't dealt with my aunt. Then I was dealing with my mom. Then my other aunt. I just normally push everything aside. That's what I do. I don't deal with it. I just push it aside. Okay, I don't have time to deal with this. I just move on. So when my son had the accident, 2 other children were killed in the accident. He survived, thank the Lord. happy about that. I was traumatized with the other kids passing. I hadn't dealt with that. So as time went on, my children would talk about my aunt, which I've never. My mom was on the call, but I've never told her this. But I couldn't talk about her. I couldn't say her name. I couldn't. If you mentioned her name, I broke down. So eventually, I had to go to counseling to deal with the loss of my aunt, my mom getting sick, then my aunt getting sick, and then my son's accident. So because of my mental anguish, because it is a mind thing. It was the memories. Because I was close to my aunt when I was young, because I used to go over there every other weekend while my mom was at work. So I didn't realize how close I was until I lost her. So I just think it's the mental anguish, the memories I had from when I was younger. Uh, it just brought everything back. So to deal with it, I had to go to counseling. So I am a proponent of counseling because I think it is good because now I can't talk about her. We joke about it all the time. When it was Christmas time, I was like, oh, man, I'm gonna miss that pecan pie, the apple pie she used to make. So now I'm okay with it because I know she was sick and I have a better understanding of the grief. So
I wanted to touch on a few things that each of you both have said, Chantel and Shirlene. And with Shirlene, one of the things that I think is so important, like you mentioned, when we talk about grief and loss, it's more than just losing a person, and it's all tied into control. We are traumatized by our genuine lack of control. We couldn't control someone's passing. We couldn't control the pandemic happened. We couldn't control that there was a loss of jobs, that there's a loss of finances. We like to be in control. We like to be able to know that we can navigate or affect change in a way that has a good outcome. And when that doesn't happen, it does create, when the loss happens, it does create the grief. We grieve that thing that should have been, that thing that we were working so hard towards. And so I absolutely agree with that because grief is so much more encompassing. In fact, when I was talking with Chantel, I said, what part of it are we talking about? Because it's so big. You know, there's so many facets of grief as it relates to loss. And then that was Chantel mentioning even the importance of understanding that there could be a sequence of events that then present that trigger, and then you have to really hone in and deal with it. Whether that's going to counseling, whether that's going to a support group. I've even, talked to friends who have experienced, who've been divorced, and they say to me, they're very apologetic, but they say, the only thing I can liken your loss to is how I felt when I got divorced. And I respect that they feel, that they have something that they can kind of dig towards, because it means they lost that should have been. They got married, they made vows of what was supposed to be, happily ever after, and that didn't come to fruition. So when we talk about grief and everything that it encompasses, it is absolutely appropriate for us to also look into the other areas that people are dealing with. So like in this pandemic, there are family members who have lost loved ones who did not have that ability to gather in a church, for everyone to gather at a graveside. Some of them didn't even have the choice on how to bury their dead because the government decided for them. So that will be a trigger for them going forward. And then even with the loss of jobs, just the report from the news of the rate of unemployment right now, how historically high it is a testament of the condition we are in across the nation. It's not just Texas. And so these are all different people that are dealing with some level of grief as a result of loss. So thank you for bringing that aspect in, because it's important that we share that too. It's just so encompassing, this topic, but I'm grateful that we're having it.
Being able to say that, what would the panel, and it's just kind of an open forum, what would the panel suggest because this is going to be posted on YouTube, and so people have a tendency to watch this on their own. And so what would you share with a viewer about, just from your perspective, about how to deal with and how to go through, even from your experience or just from your knowledge, either one, how do you go through this? How do you survive? And I think that's a perfect word, survive through this process, because it is such a horrific process. How do you survive day to day? I know you guys shared about, the things that kind of came up after this is happening, but you guys are surviving now. Because we know that people are going to survive this, whatever they're going through, they're going to make it, they're going to survive. You are still here, you're still living and carrying on after your losses. How do people do that now? When it's so personal, so close?
I would say acceptance. Accepting that it happened. Because for a while, I couldn't accept that my aunt had passed. So I think acceptance was what got me learning how to deal with her death and everything else that had happened. It happened. So now how do I move on after this? That's what I had to figure out.
I think that for me, at some point, it became my faith in God. I think that even with the anger, and the yelling at him, it was still who I called on in my hours of despair. It was still him that I prayed to at night. God, just give me strength to make it another day. And the people that he brought into my life during that time. I think that if we are open, that he will send us people who will support us and love us and help us make it through. I think having a husband who was so amazing and who was so supportive was a big help. Family members who allowed me to be as horrible as I needed to be on any given day to get through it. I think that understanding that there is no wrong way to grieve, understanding that it is going to hurt. I used to get so upset when people talked about the 5 stages of grief. In my mind, it's just not real. It's not real. I think that grief comes in waves, and having people around you who understands that, yeah, I might understand that my son is gone. And so, hey, I understand it. I don't like it. And I might be able to function today, but then tomorrow a wave comes and I still know that he's gone, but I can't function that day. So understanding that grief comes in waves, removing myself from, when necessary, the first couple of Christmases that Kevin was gone, we went away. We weren't here. And so some of it is changing your routines and your traditions to accommodate the loss of that person in your life. Also honoring his name by doing different scholarships and different fundraisers for organizations that we knew he would support. So I think, and talking about him, being open to his friends from high school and college, calling to remind us of what they thought about, they called him Champ, what they thought about him, and being open to letting people see me cry. People used to say, oh my God, you're so strong. And I would think, if this is what strong looks like, we're in a lot of trouble, because the reality is, you have a choice. You get up and you do whatever that next right thing is. Whether it's you get up and you call someone, or you take a shower, or you pray, or you scream, or you yell, you do what feels right for you. And I think in the process of that, having people there, I think was the biggest thing for us. Kevin died 9.5 years ago. Those friends that were so faithful and so present then are still just as faithful and just as present, and still listen to me talk about, the most amazing child in the world 24/7. Kevin was 25 when he died. And so, at the time that he died, our neighbor was pregnant with triplets. And 2 of them lived, and Mason, who they thought was the strongest, died. And I can remember people saying, oh, have you talked to her? And it's like, no, why would I talk to her? I've had my son for 25 years. She had Mason for what, a week? We're not even in the same place. And then one day I was coming home and she was coming home, and we just kind of ran into each other. And she had gone to pick up the birth and death certificate of her children. And at that moment, I realized that you cannot negate someone else's pain. Her pain, although she had him for a week, she had ideas and dreams of what she wanted for her child, just as I had hopes and dreams for what I wanted for my 25-year-old. And so the big thing I learned was, your pain is your pain, my pain is my pain, and I can't ever, 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 think that I'm the exception. It's like, why did this happen to me? And my father, if he was alive, he would say, well, Patricia, why not you? Why not? And so when I'm in that frame, I'm good. But there's still those days I'm like, oh my God, this could not have happened to me. And so it's still just that, one day at a time. And sometimes you feel like you take, 4 steps forward and you go back 8 or whatever. But the next day you just get up and you start again. And so at the time I went to Wesleyan, I was through with everything. And then I meet a different group of people, and it propels you in a different direction. So I think just the people that have come into my life, there were support groups with other mothers who had lost children. There were, all of these contacts you make. And all of a sudden you're sitting in this group and you're talking, and I would walk down my halls at school and people would say, how are you? And I would say, I'm great. I'm one day closer to death. And they would look at me like I'd lost my mind. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting in this group with other mothers who've lost children, and they say, how are you? And I say, one day closer to death. And they say, girl, I know it, high five. Because when we die, we believe we'll be reunited with our children. So, so it's the people that came into our lives and the people who just, really stayed there. And then the one thing I did think about at times is, as bad and as sad as it is that Kevin is gone, I know that there are worse things that can happen than death. The priest at our church said, when I went to talk to him, and talked about how I always prayed for Kevin's safety and blah, blah, blah. And I was so angry when he said that, but I've had years to think about it. And he said, well, and God answered your prayer. Kevin is in the only safe place there is. He's in heaven. Is there a safer place to be? And sometimes when I look at the craziness of our world, I'm reminded that there are worse things than death. It doesn't always feel like that. And I would do anything to have him back. But, sometimes, depending on the days, not every day, but sometimes I can take comfort in the belief that he is in the only safe place there is.
I absolutely echo everything that Patricia said, Miss Pat. I say that too. That one of my community partners, you mentioned earlier about, when you do so much and you're helping other people kind of get back together, right? To get back to restoration. And in my job, I'm in that same type of environment where I am constantly connecting people to resources. I'm constantly helping them with the proclivities that they find themselves in with life. Sometimes they're at their last and they're at their wits' end. And so when I found myself at that point, one of the community partners that I've labored alongside, not only professionally but ministerially, he was so sweet after Derek passed, and he said, sister, I have to remind you, he says, because I know that you're a woman filled with the faith, that your son is not in your past, he's in your future. It was one of the most beautiful things that anyone had said to me, because I, like Pat, I'm like, okay, that's one day closer. I'm one day closer. So we're talking about, the things that help while we navigate this journey. And again, I echo everything that Ms. Pat shared. I think it is important that we find ourselves in places where we can relate to others. So if you have lost a parent, there are support groups specifically for those who have lost parents. And aunts are like that. Grandmothers, are like that. They're that mothering role, right? So there's support groups for those who have lost children, those who have lost siblings. So I strongly encourage anyone who is wanting to find a way to just kind of release or share their truth, to find a group that's specific for you so that you can heal. The other part that I would encourage is there's a lot of online platforms like Twitter, and they have grief communities and support where you can become a member, and then they're the people that are speaking your language, right? So when you see when I see a tweet that says, you know, I'm so grateful that I had capacity to go to the graveside today, but I had to peel myself to walk away. So as a mother that's lost a child, I resonate with that. But when I see that someone has freedom enough to share that in that kind of atmosphere, I can like it and I can comment, and it encourages that bereaved mother. Or there's another group, you know, and one of the things we haven't mentioned, but it's very big in grief, is suicide. And there are also, you know, parents who unfortunately following a child's death, they commit suicide because the pain is so deep. It is the most excruciating thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I, like Pat, you know, I don't know what it's going to be from one day to the next. I don't know what it's going to be from 1 hour to the next. It'll take one thing to trigger, and then I'm back at square one. But, you know, for those who have lost loved ones due to suicide, they're placed in this like corner of shame. And so then they have to fight the stigma that's associated with suicide. So my words of encouragement for those who know someone who's lost a loved one to suicide is just give them space to unpack what that means to them. But just be that support that they need. They don't need you to fix it. They don't need you to understand it. They just need someone that is willing to hear what their truth is, because suicide happened because of another person's choice. And so I'll just say that about suicide. One of the things that I think as a community that I think sometimes people are shunned at, and I'm just kind of sharing things that I know that I've heard along my journey, is, you know, if you are a faith-filled Christian, they think you get tattoos and it defiles your body, right? So I just want to speak to that because, you know, we use makeup and we do piercings on our body, and, you know, no one has an offense to that, right? Or at least not a whole lot of people. So in the same manner, that's how I kind of equate tattoos. And when people pass away, there are a lot of people, loved ones, who memorialize them by getting tattoos. And I don't think that if we are talking to people and they say, oh, you know, look at my tattoo, look at what I got, that we should shun them or that we should react negatively towards them, that we should just, you know, ask, oh, so what exactly does that mean? You know, what does that tattoo mean? What does it represent, right? Give them that avenue, that point of conversation where it gives them freedom to talk about their loved one. We create traditions in this journey following loss. We create ways that whatever this new normal looks like, and ways that we can carry our loved ones forward. So for our family, before the pandemic, what we started doing on, as well as going to counseling, group and individual, we went and had monthly massages. Because as you know, when you're experiencing grief, it has so many other components that happen to your body physically. Your health becomes, you know, in a decline state because of the effect of the stress on your body, and just mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So we would do that every month as a family. We would go and have these massages. So I encourage families and loved ones to start new traditions that are helping you to be healthy, and then maybe even traditions that you can do to help carry that person forward. So like for us, one of Derek's favorite foods was pizza. He could not refuse pizza. So there's, you know, on occasion we'll say, okay, you know, we're having dinner with Dee, right? So we're gonna bring in pizza today, right? And this is a book, I wanted to share this book. This is a book called Past and Present. And this is a way that people can kind of just look into ways that you can carry your loved one forward. It's Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive, and it's by Allison Gilbert. Another book that really helped me was by Megan Devine. You can see all my little stickies in there, but it's okay that it's not okay. If you're looking for a read where grief is spoken about, and it's just frankly discussed, I highly recommend that book. But I would definitely say to people who are coming in with their mantle of praise, set that aside. You know, I'm an elder in the church and I love the Lord, but we need to be real about what grief is. In fact, this is what I say, especially to our believers who are listening. And we were on a training last night with Bishop Jakes, and he said what I have been saying. He said it differently. But what I have been sharing with people is, if you are a believer, our faith is anchored in grief and loss. It is anchored in grief and loss because we grieve at the fact that Jesus had to go to the cross and had to suffer the kind of death that he suffered, and he was sinless, but he took on our sin. And so we are reminded of that. So we are in a constant remembrance of grief and loss. And if you are a Christian, if you're a faith-filled believer, that's what ties you to the anchor of the Lord. That's what ties you to the altar of grace. So I say that because in this season, when we try to help people who are navigating pain and loss, remember where your faith is if you're a Christian. You have something that correlates to the pain of others. And we can't use that as a high platform of equating our faith level and their faith level. So I just want to make that very clear while we're sharing ways to help people cope. Remember, we're all rooted in the same thing. The other one is the Good Grief devotional. It's 52 weeks toward hope, and that's by Brent D. Christensen. This is an amazing devotion to read. When people have capacity, it's available on Amazon, and it comes with a journal. So you can buy this as a set. So I share these books because a lot of times when we are experiencing grief and loss, and this is also for people who have lost their jobs, who have lost whatever their marriage, grief is grief. It's a good way to just kind of work through it in your own time and then pin your thoughts, because then you can trace it back. When you trace it back, you can always see that God indeed is the word personified. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. And today you might be okay. Tomorrow you might just need to go back and read your own words back to you. And I can promise and guarantee you that you will hear our Father's voice encouraging you, even in your moments of despair. And Miss Pat is absolutely right. We can be mad at God. He is omniscient, he is omnipresent, and he is omnipotent. So that means he's in all places at all time. He's all knowing, he's all seeing, and he's all powerful. So our little selves being mad at him does not take his love from us. There's nothing we can do that's going to make us be separated from his love. And that's a beautiful thing. So you can be mad at him. Just be sure that when you are mad at him, that you're honest with yourself that you are, and that you can pull yourself back in by just simply being. My scripture reference, and this will be the last thing that I say, that I rest in on the days where my grief is more than I can tolerate, is Romans 8:26, which reminds us that the Holy Spirit makes intercession for us. He does it in moanings and groanings that we don't understand, but the Holy Spirit knows how to talk to the Father for us. So when I'm in that moment, I say that, I'm like, Lord, I'm leaning on the Holy Spirit, because right now I have no words, but what he says, you listen to.
Wow, that was awesome, awesome, awesome. I wrote down some things, and I just wanted to kind of say something about them. I love that Miss Pat said, doing the next right thing. I think that is awesome, just to be able to do the next, whatever that thing is for you to do. That's what you need to do. What feels good for you, I don't think there's no barriers to that. There's no right or wrong to that. What makes you feel good right now? What do you need to do? And I think that's excellent. And then, Elder Amanda, when you said creating new traditions, sometimes because your heart hurts so bad that it's really hard to align your cognitions with the hurt of your heart, and I think just kind of giving way to that and giving ideas to that, I think that is an awesome voice of help. And I appreciate the books that you posted. Please kind of put them up one more time so that people can still see them. Click your mic for a second, and what past and present. Who's that again? Allison
Gilbert.
Gilbert. Okay. So I just want people to have an opportunity. If they had to write it down, they could write it down. And the next one you have is what?
It's by Megan Devine.
Megan Devine.
That you're
it's
not
okay that you're not okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is
awesome. Awesome.
And the in there, so no apologies there.
Okay, no problem. And then the last one is Good Grief Devotional. And I think that's really, really good. And as because one of the things that we talked about was being able to have something that people could use and they could actually pick up. And so they can get all these from Amazon?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This is the journal.
And that's the journal? Okay. Yes. Okay, cool. That's really good. You know, I also wanted to add to this discussion about depression. Because a lot of times, as a result of a loss, people become depressed, or they have symptoms that look like depression, and they can't seem to release them. They can't seem to let go or just get out of the slump, or not being able to move, not being able to work. And one of the things I was reading was about pre-existing depression that might have already been there, and this triggered it. So a grief episode triggering it, and then it not just being grief, but it also being really depression. And sometimes if we kind of downplay it, that it's not depression, it's just, oh, you're just going through, and just hang on in there. I think Miss Pat used some cliches that people have a tendency to just say, you know, it's going to be all right. You know, God has a plan. And, you know, they'll downplay it. And the reality is there's something else going on. And so when people can't find their way out, at that point is to see a doctor. Okay. And to get yourself checked out. And there's nothing wrong with getting checked out. Having, you know, I talked about crying. I had these crying episodes that must have went on about 5 months. Just every day I cried. Every day I went to work, my face was swollen. And eventually I talked to somebody. And it kind of helped. And I think the problem was I wasn't talking. And so that's why I was having these moments. I was helping other people, but I wasn't talking about my own stuff going on, how I was feeling about this. And I'm quite sure other people were feeling things just as the whole family was feeling something about this. But for some reason, I felt alone in my journey because I didn't talk about it. And so because I didn't talk about it, I just cried about it. It kind of lingered it lingered for months. And not that it ever went away, you know, because there are times now, there are thoughts that come, and they're fleeting thoughts that happen. And I'll think of something, and it'll make me sad. I'll see a movie, and it'll make me reminisce about the past. But one of the things I was able to let go after I had a really good talk with somebody, I was able to let that, not let go of the feelings, not let go of the person, but let go of the feelings that I was having. And it was just weighing me down and further down. But if you find yourself that you can't get up, and you can't move, and you can't progress, and you can't let some things go, please go and get some help. Okay? It's okay. It's okay to do that. And I wanted to share that. And I had wrote something down. Grief doesn't have a time limit on it, but it's not as intensive as depression. And just to kind of add, depression brings on senses of worthlessness when you don't feel, and that's not grief, that's depression. It brings on despair and other feelings that's not depression. Again, it might have happened at the same time, but it's not it. And so just a reminder to please go get checked out by a physician first and then therapist. Always check out with a physician before you do the therapist, because there may be some other things that have now triggered because of stress. Elder Amanda brought up about stress. Yes. Other things can develop in the body that you probably need to get checked out as well. So I just wanted to say that, ladies, I really enjoyed the fact that you shared what you shared. I just have a new level of thinking, and I appreciate that. I saw Fern being able to get ready to say something. Go ahead, Fern.
Yes, ladies. Gosh, you guys shared some awesome information. And I didn't even realize that I was dealing with loss and grief at the same time. That's what kind of has been going on with me, especially with my mom, because I really didn't have an opportunity to grieve her death, with her passing away, because she was ill. But with my son, he is alive. But the place that he is in, because he's incarcerated, makes me feel like he's dead. And so I had someone to say to me the other day, God got it. He knows, he wouldn't put more on you that you can bear, and just all of these other things. And my heart goes out to both of you ladies who children have passed away, because my son is in jail for murder. And so it has been very difficult for me, because he told me, he said, Mom, I didn't do it. So me having all of these other different thoughts in my mind has caused me to be very, very depressed. And so I had to go and get some help, because I was trying to do it on my own. And I wanted to share with you all that because I started doing it on my own, I have been able to walk through the process. And I'm like you, there is no particular step that you take when it comes to grief. Some days I have a good day, some days I have a bad day. But when he calls me, is the days that I have the most trouble. And I had to figure out, why am I so upset, or I'm so depressed, I'm so hurt every time he calls. But I began to realize, because that's my baby. It hurts me to see him in that place, and I'm totally helpless. There's nothing I can do. So I just started praying about it. I started journaling about it. I started talking about it. And I'm like you, Elder Amanda. Amanda, I started doing research. I started reaching out to other women that were in the same position that I am in. And I actually found a couple of ladies that their children, one lady, her son has been offered 50 years. Another lady, she has two sons that are in jail for the same thing. And they both are innocent. So we have been able to support each other during this journey. So I would just like to share, if there are people out there that you have children that may be incarcerated for any reason, you definitely need to get involved in a support group, because this is something you cannot walk through by yourself. And so I'm so grateful that you all had this particular topic on today. And it has helped me so much. And I really appreciate those books. I'm going to buy those. Thank you for letting me share.
I just wanted to say one more thing too. One big thing I did after Kevin died is I started writing poems. I became an artist. I became a baker. I became all these different things. But the thing that stuck is I started journaling. And so quickly, I'll share y'all a quick poem, okay? Because it's one of my favorites. And it was written for like his little cousins who always wanted to know, well, is Kevin in heaven? Can he see me? Blah, 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 blah. So here it is. And it's, are you still in heaven, Kevin? Are you still in heaven, Kevin? I asked because last night when I was sleeping, I dreamed that you were creeping. You waited on the moon, didn't want to move too soon. You had to skip on stars, and then you dodged the cars. Then as quiet as a mouse, you crept into the house. On my cheek, you placed a kiss, watched my face transform in bliss. And then you turned around. You had to leave this town. You dodged the cars, skipped on the stars, jumped on the moon, couldn't move too soon, answered, yes, Mom, this is Kevin, and of course I'm still in heaven. And so that was for the little cousins that always had that to ask. And then there were days that weren't so great in my journal, and this was it. And it was one of those weeks I had cried every single day. I mean, to the point that I was at work and my principal came in and said, this might be a good time for you to go home. My contacts had stuck to my eyes because I had cried so hard and so long. But it was dark days of my soul. You always remind me I am not whole. I try to remember my happy place. It completely consisted of you. Your smile, your laugh, your smell, your touch, and that handsome, handsome face. Dark days of my soul, you make me feel so very old. With each breath, I think of your death. You died, and I died. and I cried and I cried. Dark days of my soul, you leave me trembling and feeling cold. I anticipate warmth from memories of you. Sometimes not even that will do. Dark days of my soul, I dare you be so bold. Each time you shatter me, but you never ever completely break me. Dark days of my soul, my heart from me you stole. You left me with no explanation or reason as to why my soul must continue to endure this painful season.
Miss Pat, have you published those?
No, I just write.
Beautiful.
Oh, you need to share that with the world.
Yeah, but
Yes.
the
Those
writing,
are awesome.
the writing in itself, just one thing my therapist had me do after a while, it was a letter, and the letter started, dear Kevin, since you've been gone. And then you just write without thinking, and you write and you write. And I noticed that you tend to write the way you talk. So my letter was like a gazillion pages long. And then the second part of it was Kevin writing me. And it was, dear mom, I've been watching you and you can't think, and his was maybe like 2 pages or something like that. And the thing that was so extraordinary is that you don't think, you just write. And when I went back to read it, it was written the way that he talks, all the little abbreviations and some of the misspellings, but it was all there. And it was just an amazing exercise in, that connection that we continue to have with our children or the people we love, even after they're gone. One day I was driving to the cemetery 2 summers ago, and it had to be a gazillion degrees outside. And I'm crying and I'm sad and I just miss him and I just want to be with him. And I'm headed to the cemetery and I hear him laughing. And I'm like, what's so funny? He said, Mom, okay, let's be for real. It's 100 million degrees outside. You're crying, you're sad. I've never heard anybody say, let me go to the cemetery so I can get cheered up. I think you need to turn around and go home. And I honestly just turned my car around, came home, and laughed all the way home. So I think that people need to realize that even if they're gone, it's like the saddest day. I looked at my window and the shadow had made a heart on the blind, or you see a cardinal fly by. There are always these little reminders that, that loved one is absent from the body, granted, and present with the Lord. And that was one of the first things my mother said to me when we saw Kevin body after he died. And I can remember being so angry. But now I see all of these little signs of, oh my gosh, he's still here. Like the time I washed my face in shampoo because I wasn't paying attention, and he's laughing. So they're just all of these little things. And Fern, listening to you makes me look at things different because, I have had a problem with the boys who murdered Kevin. Not that I hate them or anything, but they deserve to be, and da-da-da-da-da, and hoping all kinds of horrible things happen to them. And, I think that it's so good to hear someone else who's walking a different journey, but still grieving a child that is still on earth, but still absent from them. So my prayers are with you, and I will be remembering you when I pray, okay?
Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you to Amanda and Miss Pat for being so transparent and sharing your stories and helping others.
And Fern, wow.
And Fern too. I think this was
Yeah.
just a real conversation, and I thank y'all for opening up because I know how hard it was. I know how hard it is to be vulnerable, and I just thank y'all for that.
Can I share one last thing? Number one, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, for this conversation, for this space. I always say that when we make space for others, that it promotes healing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm grateful for the healing that's gone forth today and the healing that will continue to go forth for those who watch this at a later date or time. One of the things I wanted to share is another online support, which is called Grief Share. And many of you maybe have already heard of it. But right now, especially in this pandemic, one of the things that they have done in order to continue to connect people to this important resource is they are now offering online sessions. It used to be just in person, and it's free. For some of them, the majority of them, it's free. If there is a cost, it might be just for the textbook. It's my understanding that they were trying to move towards a downloadable format of that textbook.
Okay. Okay.
but I would definitely recommend Grief Share. So you can
Share.
find information at griefshare.org.
Okay. Okay.
And I was going to say also, Miss Pat, the signs that God allows. The word tells us He's a God of signs and wonders, right? So every time there is a sign, I, like you, I lean into that and I'm like, okay, that's a sign from Derek. You know,
Absolutely.
I wake up at 3:00 in the morning every day and I say, that's my son. So when I wake up, I just have a little talk with him and then I'll go to sleep. But it's every day at 3:00. Between 3 and 4, he's waking me up. And I'm okay with that. And I look forward to however long that's going to continue. Before his passing, I would have been hotter than fish grease if he would have came in and woke me up at 3:00 in the morning just to talk with me. But it's a different season. And so I lean into that blessing and that sign. So thank you for pointing to that as well, because it's okay to acknowledge that God is indeed the God of signs and wonders, and He allows them to still be very present, even now in the spiritual sense.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, ladies. Wow, it's been good. Good.
It was good. And as we wrap up, I'm going to post this on Facebook, YouTube. Again, go to the YouTube channel and subscribe and like, and on Facebook, like and share. And thank you all, Fern, Miss Pat, Amanda. Thank you, Mom, for being a listener. Thank you, Charlene, for helping me with my vision. And I love y'all.
Love y'all. Thank you, ladies. Have a great day. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.